Hi, this is Editor's Take. I'm Sakshi Batra, and with me is Gaurav Choudhury, is the Deputy Executive Editor of Moneycontrol, and we are going to be discussing about India's trade deficit concerns with China. Thanks a lot, Gaurav, for joining in. Now, we are discussing this at the backdrop of the recently held talks between Prime Minister Modi and also Chinese President Xi Jinping, who met in Mamallapuram just last week as well. And the trade concerns also were brought up as part of the discussions as well. So, first up, to understand for the viewers also, what is the kind of trade deficit that we have with China right now, and what are the broad concerns around that?
So China, including Hong Kong, the trade deficit is about $52 billion, and that seems to be growing. In fact, India's trade deficit with China is growing almost proportionately with the amount of trade value that it's growing bilaterally between the two countries.
Yeah.
And that has been a concern for years now. How do we actually reverse this, or at least turn, while it may not be possible to achieve a trade surplus with China in the immediate future or in the foreseeable future. At least we can, the policymakers have been looking for ways and means to ensure that this trade deficit doesn't widen further and progressively bring it down. When Prime Minister Modi met Xi Jinping in Chennai, in Tamil Nadu recently, trade was a big topic that came up for discussion, and it also came up for discussion in the backdrop of the negotiations that is currently going on for a comprehensive regional comprehensive economic partnership agreement, what is commonly now called as the RCEP deal of 16 nations, of which China is one of the countries that is negotiating for this comprehensive partnership agreement. The whole thing is that if of all the 16 nations that are negotiating the RCEP agreement, with China alone, we have a $52 billion trade deficit, and all these countries combined the trade deficit is about $102 billion. So of $102 billion, more than half of it is accounted for by China, and that is why India is now trying to find out whether within the RCEP deal, whether India and China can work out a separate protocol.
Absolutely. Now, to understand what has actually gone wrong, you say that the deficit has been going for a long time now with China. What are the sticky issues that have been there, and why have we not been able to resolve these trade deficit?
Yeah, China, as we know, is the world's is the world's factory, as it was. So it exports to all. It has cracked the code on a very cost-effective manufacturing. And to that extent, India is also a very large market for Chinese products. And in fact, we can see with Diwali just around the corner, most of the lights that will light up homes across the country would have been imported from China.
Yeah.
And so Diwali lights is emblematic of the kind of products that have actually got into the Indian market, not because that India is not producing it, but China has managed to come out with a very cost-effective solution of these kind of products, which are mass consumed. And India and while these are mass consumed products, there is also a problem in intermediate and secondary products, like say steel, for instance.
Sure.
So there's a big worry that if India brings down, under the RCEP agreement, if we bring down the import tariffs on steel, in secondary steel from China, and also primary steel from China could actually flood the Indian market, and that could adversely affect the domestic industry. That is something that is a growing concern, and that could be one of the key sticking points that could delay an RCEP deal.
Absolutely. But what has been also agreed between China and India right now in the recent meetings with Xi Jinping as well is that both the countries are willing to form a joint panel which will actually look at the trade concerns that are currently persisting at the backdrop of this RCEP meeting, which has ended by putting the onus on India to resolve this issue bilaterally with all the countries as well.
Yes.
What is the way forward now?
So that is one big step forward between the two countries. Trade, as we know, it has been a key sticking point. I mean, there are other sticking points in the geostrategic space, but so far as in the broader strategic framework, trade also occupies is also a big piece of that strategic framework. And unless we iron out the rough edges on the trade front, the strategic framework cannot move to the next level. And progress of the strategic framework or the strategic relations between the world's two most populous nations, who happen also to be neighbors, is something that we'll have to critically depend on far happier trade relations. And for that, India has to find a way out of ensuring that domestic interests are completely ring-fenced, while bringing down tariffs for Chinese products. For Chinese manufacturers, India is one huge market that they cannot ignore.
Yeah.
And for India, the risk is that this market should not turn into India should not turn into a complete, importer of cheap or cost-effective manufactured products from China. So it's a fine wedge that it's a fine balancing act that Indian trade negotiators will have to work out, because, as I said, it is a large part. It's a very strong part of the larger strategic relations and the framework under which India and China have progressively over the last 10 years or so have made great progress.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot then, Gaurav, for sharing all that insight. Well, all eyes will be on the RCEP meeting that will be held, or the negotiations that will be held in November as well in Bangkok. And before that, what will India do and what will China come to conclude on the trade deficit concerns that India has with China, and also on the 80% of the products where it was really asked of India to reduce the import duties on Chinese products as well. So there is a fine balancing act that India will need to do, and we'll have to just keep keep an eye out on what will really happen on this front as well. Thanks a lot for joining us in this edition of Editor's Take, and do stay logged on to moneycontrol.com for more news and updates. Thanks for watching.